Hiya, and welcome back to Unsolicited. If you have spent even 2 minutes in GovCon, you have probably been in a room where everyone agrees AI is the future. But no one can explain why pilots keep stalling. Today, we're talking about that why. Why government AI, automation, and cyber initiatives so often fail to deliver what they promise, and how the issue usually isn't just the model, the tool, or the vendor. It's the foundation underneath all of it. Our guest today lives at the intersection of cyber, data, and execution. John America. I love it. John America, we were talking earlier, his dad was in the military. Yes, you have officially now known there was a Captain America that wasn't on television. And so John America is the founder and Chief Growth Officer of Recro, which is a cybersecurity and data leader with deep experience supporting intelligence community and DoD environments. John began his career supporting special forces and intelligence missions, where he saw firsthand how technical systems directly impact operational outcomes. He later led enterprise-scale cybersecurity and data science efforts, including work supporting the National Reconnaissance Office. That experience, leading teams through ambiguity, immature data environments, and high-stakes missions, eventually led him to found Recro, where he focuses on building the foundational capabilities organizations need before advanced automation or AI can actually work. John, welcome to Unsolicited.
Thank you.
That was a long intro. You've done a lot. It was very cool. I love that we're talking about this because everybody thinks AI. Mm-hmm. And when something AI doesn't work, it must be the system.
Sure.
And so let's talk about foundations. Let's reframe this a little bit to talk about failure away from the tool and actually look at the foundation.
Yeah, absolutely. To your point, I would say that that's one of the most interesting things that I think I see. And, you know, not to sidebar too much, but if I've learned anything from traveling and learning from other cultures, especially when you get into civilizations that have been around a lot longer than we have in America, one of the things that I think I always find very interesting, one of the common threads is around how things don't change. Mm-hmm. Right. And so, you know, the way that they're applied in the situations, right. But we're still pretty much the same as we were thousands of years ago. And so that, of course, boils into everything else around it, right? So to your point, AI might be a relatively new thing, right? Especially in the government world, it's definitely new. There's still a lot of skepticism around it. And to be honest, even outside of that, actually, I know that, you know, with the new year, I've been seeing a lot of articles around things talking about, you know, AI exhaustion, basically, that people are tired of AI everything. And there's even almost a push of some people saying, you know what, for 2026, my New Year's resolution is I want to go more analog, right? Like I'm tired of it.
Getting back to the abacus.
And I thought it was kind of funny, but I was like, but you know what? I get it.
Yeah. Yeah.
Right.
Exhaustion.
Yeah.
And plus probably there's a little bit of fear of not measuring up, not being able to run it appropriately,
Sure.
cue it properly. Humans know where human error exists.
Yep.
Yeah.
And that's, you know, to that end, right? Even just using different generative AIs like ChatGPT and Grok and stuff like that, like corporately, I would say, or personally even, right? That's a great point too, is sometimes it's extremely frustrating and exhausting.
Yeah.
I know that I've kind of walked away many times being like, you know what? To me, the whole point of using the AI was supposed to be that it's not forgetful. Right? Because it is a machine and I'm a human and I'm forgetful,
Yeah.
right? One of my biggest flaws. But it's not true because they still have memories, right?
For sure. You can max that out. Now, you've said that when AI initiatives fail,
Mm-hmm.
that it's rarely because the model is bad,
Mm-hmm.
that it's because the data and infrastructure underneath were not ready.
Yes.
What does that look like when you're actually inside a government environment
hmm
and you're not in a briefing somewhere and it's day-to-day reality? What does it mean to not be ready?
Sure. So to your point about the foundations and kind of where I was going with how some things just don't change. I guess that's what's so interesting to me is that there's this big rush to get there.
Mm,
But if we think of it in terms of a common acronym people use for this is DIKW, right? So data, information, knowledge, wisdom. And
okay.
that's a process, right? You go from one to the other. And the problem is exactly what you just described. AI lives at the wisdom layer.
Oh,
But if you haven't gotten there, you can't just skip those other steps, right? And that's the foundational problem. What it really boils down to is that everyone's in this rush to try to skip. Everyone wants a shortcut, right? Everyone wants turnkey solutions, right? Used to be one of the big government buzzwords that
yeah.
they don't like anymore. But that's the reality day to day, right? Is that, even before LLMs were a thing, right? This was still the case. We weren't necessarily preparing for what we didn't know was coming, right? But that same kind of construct was still there. Like I remember being in some specific projects where we were trying to just get all the data together, break down those data silos that often exist in the government, right? Bring it all together into one place where we can actually try to do something with it. Step two, turning that into information. That's where we can do things like correlate, right? To use a cyber example that's very basic at this point, I'll say, but is I remember, how big of a deal it was when SIMs like ArcSight were able to sit there and say, okay, we have all these login attempts from the same user, these failed login attempts, and we're going to consolidate that down into one actual record to say this user between this time window failed to log in 5 times. So now we've got a single event, right? So that's kind of an example of how we can turn raw data into information,
Okay.
right? And then from information to knowledge is actually being able to do something with that. That's where things like RAG live, right?
Okay.
When we're talking in the AI context, right? And so that's the next important step that then is necessary before you can actually have AI do anything, right?
So it goes back to a lot of the conversations that we've had with multiple guests that you've got to have appropriate processes, appropriate procedures, all of your knowledge has to make sense before
Yep,
you can ask AI to do anything with it.
exactly. Otherwise, it's garbage in, garbage out,
Oh my gosh,
right?
our owner would love you. He says
He
that
sure would.
all the time.
One of my favorite ones to say,
Oh
right?
my
Because it's so
gosh.
true. And my
Okay.
point is that hasn't changed. That right? That truth, garbage in, garbage out, that's an old saying,
Yeah, for
right?
sure. For sure. But it makes great sense because just because you have AI as a tool, if the information that you're giving it doesn't make sense,
hmm
it's going to hallucinate with you.
Exactly.
Yeah.
And that's really what it all boils down to.
Okay. So, from your experience, then, how early in the life cycle do these failures actually get locked in? And
Sure.
then, long before anyone decides to start blaming the tool, like, how?
Yeah. No, that's a good point. As far as the timeline, I'm sorry, I'm looking at my notes, which I
No,
have on my
please
phone.
do.
I think I don't know, I'm not finding it in here right now, but that's fine. I think that it does vary.
Okay.
I think that oftentimes what I see is it fails at the point when you realize, which you could argue means it was doomed to fail from the beginning.
Good. Yeah.
But I guess often as the contractor team coming in, right, where we've come into certain environments where we're doing a project around it, I think it's that realization point of that none of this process that I've been describing has even been considered, right? And I think, DOW has done a great job at trying to get ahead of that recently, right? There's been some initiatives and policies and things pushed out from CDAO with the overall data strategy, right? All those that are at least putting the intent behind trying to do a lot of what I was describing, breaking down those silos, actually making the data available, right? Even in Hegseth's recent address on I think it was the 12th.
At SpaceX.
Yeah, at SpaceX, he mentioned that, right?
Mm-hmm.
That part of what he's ordering is that we work towards making that data available, right? And that's where I go back to, but it's not data, right? We need the information, we need the knowledge. It's the whole process around that, the maturity that comes with it. It's, as a three-step process, I think of it as data, governance, operations, right?
Okay.
And so governance is a huge piece too, right?
So by governance, do you mean like a standardization of how it's executed or executed on?
Yes. Funny enough, I think of it actually being very similar to how it is in business. It's consistency,
Okay.
right? Which you don't want. Like a good example of governance to me would be, I've been in projects where we're getting different results, right? We're running the same algorithm, getting different results on a weekly basis. Let's say it's a, SimSOAR use case. So we're saying it's more around some kind of alert,
Okay.
right? But we're getting different answers that don't make sense, and we're trying to figure out why. Most of the time, it's a governance problem. When we're looking at it, what we find is that it's because we didn't lock in the data construct, for example. So now we're getting the data in a slightly different field than it used to be. So when we had something configured to look at a certain field, that's no longer true, breaks the alert, right?
Okay.
Or maybe it's a permissions issue where we didn't have the permissions locked in correctly. And so now we're running into, which is a whole nother can of worms, but,
Yeah, right.
but right, even just there, we're running into problems where we're getting inconsistent results. And I guess just to expand a little further on that, access control is another huge one, right? Which bleeds into other areas, even just as far as, let's say I'm the one running the query. Well, what do I have a need to know of, right? What information am I actually allowed to have access to?
You don't want it to give you more than you were supposed to get.
Yeah. And that's another example where I feel like a lot of RAG projects are failing now that we're seeing.
Okay.
Is largely around things like that, where it's either under or over permissioned, and finding that sweet spot is key, right? But if you overdo it, if you just say, hey, Hegseth just ordered us to make all the data available, here's everything. Well, now all of a sudden, let's just say me as a random analyst, right? I have the ability to go in and see the exact location of every single person who works here. Is that what you wanted?
Yeah, right. Are you
Right?
sure?
Did you really want me to have that kind of information available
Yeah.
to me? That's an important detail for certain things, but
Well, I think it's a good point that you make, because a lot of the times people just think, am I giving it the right prompts?
right.
And it isn't just about prompts. It's about the knowledge base. To your point,
Mm-hmm.
it's about the governance. What should I or shouldn't I? What can it share? What shouldn't it? And then
Mm-hmm.
also, how are we making sure that the information that I'm giving it is geared appropriately based on, to your point, did fields change?
Right.
Did any of the information that I had put in its original knowledge base change so that it's giving me accurate output?
Yep, exactly. And to your point, that ETL, that curation process, right, to enrich the data, get it into a state that where that's where it becomes information, right? But that process and the consistency, and right, like you just said, if you're, we've even had, to give another example of it, I remember hearing from the CISO at one of the customers I was working for, his complaint was, I have two different teams that are both working with the same tools, right? Giving me two different answers about what's going on. And it was something he asked me to dig into, right? And it turns out that it was exactly that problem you just described. It was that when we were curating the data and doing whatever we're doing to it in these two different teams, we ended up with slight variances that made total sense. But right, maybe whenever I'm looking at it, I'm time bounding it in some way. Like I'm deciding all on my own without necessarily explaining that in detail to the CISO, who doesn't usually want that level of detail in a report, right?
Sure.
But that's why we're getting different answers. Could just be as simple as that. And right, goes back to a lot of those governance issues, or right, how you're actually looking at it. Could even be, I guess, more on the curation side, would be more around exactly what the data looks like in the end, how you've enriched it, or what you've decided is okay to modify versus the raw data, right?
Yeah.
But
Raw data, that's a whole other thing, right? Because
Mhm.
let's peel the onion a little bit. You talked about Secretary of War Hegseth's speech, and he spoke about accelerating AI adoption across the military,
Mhm.
including leveraging commercial models like Grok, which you mentioned, as part of a broader push to reduce friction and move faster. We actually reacted on this topic in an episode last week,
Mm-hmm.
and the message from leadership was actually pretty clear that AI is no longer optional
Mm-hmm.
and that the department is serious about operationalizing it. So when
Sure.
you hear leadership emphasize speed, urgency, all of that around AI adoption, what do you see as the foundational capabilities that need to mature in parallel with that urgency to make that acceleration successful?
Sure. Well, I'll tell you right now, two things that come to my mind immediately are more around kind of the physics of it.
Ooh, physics.
Um,
What do you mean?
just maybe not the right term, but more in the sense of, and I guess I should say logistics, but you know, I've seen some reports recently talking about data centers, and I know that that is an initiative. There's been pushes for more data centers, and right, the
Yeah.
acknowledgement at least that we need more. But it kind of goes beyond things as simple as that, right? It's not just that we need more space, more, machines that are actually up and running, but what about things like the power grid? Right. And so I
Yeah.
know one report I saw recently, and I wrote it down to make sure I get the numbers right, was saying that from 2024 to 2030, our data centers alone, not including anything else, will see a 134% increase in power needs versus 2024. That's right over 2x, 2.3 roughly,
Yeah.
right?
That's
That's
a
huge.
lot.
Where's that power coming from?
That's right. And how is that
Right.
sustainable?
Right. So to your point, in parallel, we need to be thinking about how are we going to generate enough power? And I think this is particularly important when we talk about trying to accelerate things like AI, which actually goes to the one that's maybe arguably more physics oriented, GPUs. They're a huge piece of that, right?
Yeah.
Well, I saw something from one of the Google AI architects anonymously said that what they're finding is that if you even just have the GPUs running at 60 to 70% utilization, the life expectancy, 1 to 2 years.
The
What's
cost.
the
Yeah.
cost of those GPUs? They're very expensive.
Yeah.
But then on top of that, what's the typical government life cycle?
Mm-hmm.
5, if not longer.
That's right. And it all comes down to funding,
Right.
right? Yeah.
And so that's the other piece that comes to my mind immediately is thinking about things like, okay, so this is great. You want to be able to do all this, right? But we need more than a 5-year refresh cycle as far as how we're planning for budget,
Yeah.
right? A lot more, in fact, right? 1 to 2 years is a lot faster. Even the commercial world, I think, has gone down to about a 3-year average on refresh.
Yeah.
They're not ready for it either in that regard, right?
Well, I'll tell you, my time in
So,
the military, it was rather frequent that I would see that there were commanders or units that wanted the new something,
mhm,
whatever it was, and they would purchase that new something, not giving any credence or consideration to the maintenance tail that came
yep,
along with that, like refreshes, updates, parts, pieces.
yep,
And so oftentimes either it would go unused once it quote
mhm,
unquote keeled over,
mhm,
or they were using people who just happened to have some kind of wisdom in it that
sure,
knew how to make those kinds of updates, but it wasn't sustainable. And
yeah,
so if we're not considering all of those secondary, tertiary things
mhm,
that come along with the larger use of AI,
mhm.
then we're putting ourselves on our back foot here.
Yeah, exactly.
Yeah, wow. Okay, I mean, so when foundations don't mature in parallel like they're supposed to, where do things usually break first, would you say? And is that governance, which you mentioned? Is
Mhm.
it data quality, security, trust? Where do you see them breaking first?
I would say it's kind of a combination of that data layer versus the governance, but it's the data silos. As try as we might, right? Have yet to be anywhere that it's easy to come in and say, hey, you know what? We want to be able to do some great stuff with some algorithms and models, and right, we're coming in to do this. These are the data sets we need. Can I have them? Right? That conversation is usually met with under whose authority, right? And right under
Who said you could get this
right.
signed by 16
And
people?
oh, we're not actually necessarily the ones that actually own that data. We're just stewards of that data. So you can't even necessarily get it from us, right? Maybe to use more of my IC examples, but maybe it's actually NSA that owns that data, and we're just, stewards of it, or maybe it's CIA who owns it, right?
Ugh.
You hear those kind of things where it's like, okay, so now I have to try to get my govy who works not at either of those agencies, right? To try to get permission across those groups, right? And that becomes a nightmare.
So the data you need is there. You just can't get to it.
Right.
Oof. Okay. Well, I mean, let's talk about this a little bit. You mentioned in an earlier conversation that many RFIs and requirements ask for AI-driven outcomes with accounting for what has to exist underneath. From your perspective, what's usually missing from those asks? So like
Sure.
if the RFI is saying, hey, we want AI-driven outcomes, what are they not asking for that they should?
I would say for that, it's what does the plan look like? What are the deliverables
Okay.
that focus on what we talked about for those foundational capabilities, right? And so kind of to use a good example there, I know, when we've kind of always been ahead of this, right? We saw it coming. And so we've tried to always preface that whenever we've gone and done this, right? So to your point, something that is often coming back from me in RFIs, right? Whenever Recro is coming back to it, we're always saying, hey, did you guys actually think about these other deliverables, these other things that need to happen around how we're actually going to get access to the data, what that timeline looks like, some kind of notional schedule, even just to enable us to be successful in these other areas, right? We know what you want ultimately, right, is over
Mm-hmm.
here, but we're going to need this. Have you thought about even just, the going back to kind of the permissions and the governance around that, but what do we even considered allowed for what the government is okay with using AI to do, right? Because a lot of that even goes back to more of those concepts around human in the loop and right, what kind of decisions are we actually comfortable with an AI making that we're going to act on
Yeah.
versus right, where do we want to draw that line?
Well,
Have
I
we thought
like
about that?
that you're thinking like that. Like, okay, the government customer didn't even know to ask for this. Let me tell
Right.
them that I can do what they want, but these are some other things they need to consider. We had a guest on a few weeks ago and they mentioned the same thing. Like, customers like, we want this lock. And they're like, we can put that lock in, but it requires software you're not authorized to use.
Right.
So I like that it's not just, cool, let me sell you a thing.
Yeah.
Here's some of the things you should probably be considering along the way. So, I
Yeah.
mean, it's good stewardship. It's helping them accomplish
Absolutely.
their mission.
Mm-hmm.
The administration and GSA recently launched platforms like USAI
Mm-hmm.
to help agencies experiment with generative AI in a controlled way.
Mm-hmm.
What does that kind of offer make easier? And what does it still not solve inside agencies that are struggling with readiness?
I think, not to sound like a broken record, but
Yeah.
I think the answer is it provides a great sandbox environment, which is really how they described it, right? Not that they're trying to oversell it.
It's controlled.
Um, but it's not getting into agency specific data and information, which is most often what you really need to be, very useful to what you're actually trying to accomplish. And I think that that's kind of the biggest problem with something like that, right? Is that you're going to be able to feed it things to a certain degree, right? But there's definitely important pieces of how a specific agency operates, right? And we all know how that can be wildly different.
That's right.
And even sometimes, I wouldn't even say that, but it's just that the differences that exist are very important, even if they are more or less operating in the same way, right?
Yeah. And if you can't practice for those differences, sometimes you're not really making yourself ready.
Exactly.
Yeah. I mean, it's like a couple of books that I've read in the past where it walks you through, practice until you can't get it wrong.
Mm-hmm.
But if you're not even practicing the real way, then there's a lot of wrong.
Exactly.
Yeah. Yeah. Okay, so if acquisition professionals wanted fewer surprises after award, what kinds of questions should they be asking earlier before AI ever shows up in the requirement?
Sure. That's a good question. I would say they should be asking, I don't want to sound too much like a broken record on it, but they really should be asking what that plan looks like,
Okay.
right? Is it right? They should be asking those same questions that I would say is what I'm providing in feedback where I can on RFIs, right? Is that what is the plan for how we're going to get that data together, right? How are we making sure that it's actually how we need it? What does the governance look like around not just access, but making sure that we keep things consistent, right? And those that we're actually thinking about the use cases and ensuring that we want to actually be able to do these, right? And it's not just a pipe dream, but it's something that we think actually makes sense, that we are comfortable with. Kind of going back to what I was saying, right? Are we comfortable with AI making these decisions for us in certain cases?
How much leeway are we going to give it to be the decider?
Right.
Yeah, it's fair. And we think about that all the time in the work that we do. We're like, how much of that decision should be made by the unbiased AI, right?
Right.
So this has actually been a really interesting conversation, because there's a lot that, people probably still need to learn about AI. And it isn't just as simple as throw information in there and let it go find whatever's available. But before we wrap up, I guess I just want to know, like, what is your unsolicited advice to organizations that are eager to adopt AI, but unwilling to invest in the unglamorous work that actually makes it usable?
I think my advice there would be tread carefully.
Oh.
If you're not going to invest in it, if you're not going to take it seriously, if you're not going to come up with even just internally, right, what we're okay with, going back to what we've been saying, tread carefully. Try not to, don't have it be something that you are okay with using opportunistically. And right, if you're not going to put strategies in place and acceptable use policies around when we're okay with it and when we're not, then I would say maybe don't use it.
Yeah, maybe you're not quite ready. Yeah.
Right. Until you're ready to make that commitment, I think that it's a huge mistake. And my personal experience really aligns with that, as one of the first people, I think, within Recro to adopt it in a very serious way, right? And that was intentional. I knew it was coming, and I knew, right, that if I don't get ahead of it and start trying to write policies and teach the people, what we're okay with and when it's okay to use it and when it's not, and right, that there was going to be a lot more mistakes.
Yeah.
And we've seen that. I don't necessarily want to call out the companies, but we've seen it in the news, right?
Sure.
Where people are making those mistakes, where they're allowing the AI to make decisions, and then they're getting caught for it, right? And it's causing huge problems for them. And that's really what I think about with that, right? Is if you're not ready for that adoption and recognizing that, because it's nowhere near perfect.
Yeah.
It makes lots of mistakes.
Right? I mean, one of the things that we spend a lot of time doing is standardizing. Like, how do you standardize all of the information so that no matter who's giving information to the model, it's the same way, because it does make a lot of sense and it makes a big difference.
Yep. Not that I'm a huge fan of those costs we see around things like ISO 9001 and all that, but I will say that that's almost kind of what this equates to me, right? Is it's exactly like you said. If we're trying to use it for, as the CGO, for a past performance library, where we can come in and plug it in and say, hey, help write some draft language around how we're going to plug this into a solicitation, right?
Yeah.
Common way people are using it today.
Yeah.
Well, exactly like you said, I've seen it firsthand. If we have those past performance library documents in completely different formats that don't match each other in any way, shape, or form, AI does not handle that well.
That's right. That's right. And even if the prompts are so wildly different, it's going to come up with different information.
Yep. It uses it in different ways. It works better when you see that structure, which I guess plugs back into that model we talked about, right?
That's right.
Where it makes it easier to consume.
Yeah.
It helps.
This was really good. I feel like I could pick your brain all day long. I appreciate it. Thank you very much for joining us, and obviously for bringing clarity to a conversation that is moving very quickly across government, defense, just in general. So for those of you tuning in, if you want to know more about John, you can find him on LinkedIn, and you can learn all about Recro at www.recro.com. That's RECRO. So whether you're shaping requirements, leading programs, or operating inside of these environments, this conversation is a reminder that progress and preparedness go hand in hand. So if you found this discussion useful, or if you want to see more of what we have to say out here, we encourage you to go out, like, subscribe, turn on notifications so you don't miss any future episodes of Unsolicited, where we will unpack exactly what it takes to go from ambition to execution in government and in defense. And so we'll see you next time right here on Unsolicited.